Arsenal's evolution in their build-up in the second half of this season is something that has really gone under the radar, and it's a nuanced point, but a really imperative one that I'm going to tactically break down for you today. Because it was Bournemouth away, 8 games into the season, that transformed Mikel Arteta's usage of Martin Odegaard into a proper all-phase central midfielder. And it was Bournemouth at home this time that really exemplified how this Arsenal are evolving in how they use the ball. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. We got a lot to dive into today, so let's get straight on with it. As I'm talking about evolving, and as I've broken down before, we know that before Bournemouth away, Odegaard was not instructed to offer himself as this all-phase midfielder I'd been constantly calling for. Instead, him and Kai Havertz were more the interiors who primarily stayed on the last line in what was essentially, before Bournemouth away, a 2 shadow striker system with no auxiliary controller on top of Partey's inversions from right back into midfield alongside Rice, and then after his injury, Zinchenko's from left back. But ever since the reintroduction and the availability of another midfielder controller, whether that's Jorginho or now Thomas Partey, Arsenal, in the second half of this season, have increasingly been creating more and more fascinating solutions in their build-up, which now has 3 key principles. What are they? Well, number 1, there's an emphasis on the player's intuition finding solutions rather than necessarily a system as a playmaker. Number 2, there's freedom to rotate within the structure now set. And number 3, although there's not quite a balance, there is a larger share of responsibility across Arsenal's build-up leaders now. In other words, Arsenal are less rigid in having a set structure or set individuals to dominate the build-up. And what I want to put particular emphasis on is this run of games for Arsenal from about Luton at home onwards to current day, because this is where Arsenal's in-possession structures have been at their most creative and flexible best. And this is a run of form that's coincided with the reintroduction of Thomas Partey and Takehiro Tomiyasu, 2 players who, as I'm going to show, are an absolute integral part of this new evolved Arsenal usage of the ball. Because whether it is Partey or Jorginho, their position in the build-up is what I call the fixed 6 position, i.e. this is the one whose place in the pivot is going to be unaffected regardless of 8s dropping deeper or fullbacks moving inside, regardless of the side this happens on. And we've seen now Declan Rice take on that left centre mid position with an assurance we never had any doubt over. And although this is not going to be where the majority of his minutes going forward and going into next season are going to be played, this was always the plan for Mikel this season, especially in the big games, to have Partey the deepest sitting and Rice ahead of him in the left 8. And simply, we just haven't been able to see that as regularly as Mikel will have wanted and we have wanted this season. But this leads us on to what the system or what the setup is now in Arsenal's build-up, and it's what I call a pendulum 8 system. That's what I call it, and although it's a specifically unequally weighted pendulum, as we will talk about, how does it operate? Well, first of all, in initial build-up, Arsenal, as ever, use their 4-2-4 with a double pivot and a dual 10 system with Havertz and another option between the lines to drag and draw around opposition centre-backs, create isolations for the wingers, and allow us to not only play through the press with the amount of press resistance and technical quality of sort of our back 6 4-2-2-4 build-up, plus, of course, Raya in goalkeeper who splits the centre-back, but also to suck in the opposition press and play over to Kai Havertz, who wins his aerial duels and creates second ball situations where we can then generate transitions and sort of progress play more instantly. But this is not the focus, because while Partey and Jorginho, and fingers crossed this is Thomas Partey for the rest of the season now, are fixed in their place in the pivot, their partner in this 4-2-4, this initial deeper build-up, can differ. Against Spurs away in the North London derby, in order to keep our best defenders closest to goal and platform Partey's verticality on the ball better, Rice was the necessity to be next to him in that pivot, and it's what Mikel chose. And this often happens regularly in our 4-2 build-up, but against Bournemouth and mostly in the home games, it becomes Odegaard tasked with starting deeper in the pivot in our 4-2-4, dictating attacks from deep, and Rice repositioning himself higher in between the lines. But there is still sort of so much flexibility in these deeper shapes, and especially when Rice comes in the pivot. He's able to rotate with the left back and drop into that left centre back / left back role, which an example I'm showing now leads Saliba in the Brighton man-to-man press away into no man's land, and this completely decompacts their press, and Raya then is able to find Odegaard free between the lines. And this platforming of Rice and Partey, or Jorginho in this game against Brighton, that platforming of sometimes a more nominal double pivot for Martin Odegaard is going to be expanded on later. But we've also seen on occasion Raya not just splitting the centre-backs, but stepping into right centre-back himself, and Saliba actually pushing into midfield. And this inverted centre-back role for Saliba, a la John Stones, is something he can absolutely do. But for now, he's our technical leader at the back, in the middle of our back three, and that's where he's staying. But this greater level of freedom we're starting to see is where things really start to get fascinating, because it's in the settled build-up, not our deeper stuff, where this pendulum 8 system really starts to get into full flow. We've just talked about how it can be either Odegaard and Rice, who's the Partey or Jorginho partner, deeper. But like I said, this real fluidity and flexibility in this system comes into fruition when we move into settled play. When Tomiyasu is the left back, he often, of course, will invert alongside the fixed 6 Partey into midfield. But this is just one of a series of movements within this shape, because Odegaard may have remained deeper in our build-up, maintaining a sort of midfield 3 now, or he may have drifted higher in between the lines next to Declan Rice, forming a box midfield, or he may have actually began high and now drifted deeper himself. Equally, Rice can move deeper from these between the lines positions, so you sort of get points at times where we form a midfield 3 with him or Odegaard as the deeper, and sometimes sort of a 3+1 midfield shape. And you can see in this image quite the amount of auxiliary controllers outside of the fixed 6 that Arsenal have, how many potential routes of progression there are. And here, what I want to stress is, regardless of who completes the controlling aspect next to Partey, who joins him, who drops deeper, who occupies between the lines, there is a clear movement away from having the necessity of a clear box midfield shape all the time. And there is much clearer and much more emphasis on the players having their own sense of the game and playing with more expression, especially in the inclusion, I think, of Tomiyasu and the ability to bulletproof our transitional defence and our rest defence. There is certainly at times a less of a need for an out-and-out rigid structure, or at least the ability to be a bit braver, I think, in our positioning and how we create solutions against an opposition block. In this sort of pendulum 8 system, Rice's movements alongside Partey often coincide with Tomiyasu's rotation into that left 8 role between the lines, and this freer left-back berth, I think, is one that just appears tailor-made for Jurrien Timber, but more on that in my next video. Hey guys, I'm just butting in here to take you through an example, as I'm watching back the game now, of how this more condensed or blurred midfield box makes our build-up much more effective. And it's basically all about distances. I'm going to take you through this example where here Tomiyasu has moved in field, but he is very, very aware of Rice's positioning outside him, and he is waiting for Rice to make his movement, whether he positions himself between the lines or alongside Thomas Partey. Rice chooses to drift higher, and although it's not the clearest box, this is exactly what I'm talking about. There's more emphasis instead on players finding solutions, and here with Havertz as the +1 drifting into loads of space, Partey recognises the opportunity to break the lines alongside Tomiyasu in the pivot. Odegaard comes closer, Partey plays it into Tomiyasu, who first time lends it to Odegaard, and Rice continues to escort himself higher. Now Odegaard finds him, and through lots of movements, lots of rotations in how Arsenal compose their build-up, Arsenal have beaten a Bournemouth press which rank 5th in the league for passes per defensive actions this season, and we are able then to access Bukayo Saka through Rice on the right wing. I'm going to give you one more example of this too now. Odegaard has started in the pivot from the 4-2-4, and Arsenal transition into settled build-up with Tomiyasu joining the midfield to overload the Bournemouth press. Here, Rice and Havertz are the two between the lines, and as Rice pulls wide left as he often does to get his touches in this midfield, the pocket of space he was now occupying in the left 8 is free for Tomiyasu to assume. Rice is now back in the pivot, and Odegaard and Tomiyasu are between the lines, with Havertz in the centre forward. It's complete fluid rigidity and tactical understanding from the players. And that's just, I think, a really great example of how you can get slightly more flexible with your build-up and prioritise the players alongside a system too, and get the best out of both worlds. And I think probably the best way to liken this Arsenal build-up is almost to Real Madrid in a way. It's not quite as relational in terms of how Madrid at times, their build-up leaders often just literally do what they want. But it's somehow or somewhere, I think, in the middle of being able to maintain a shape which in the big away matches against physical teams is certainly required, but there's also this balance now to platforming the technicians from Arteta to just doing their thing, and this freedom is something what I want to expand on now with regards to Odegaard and the ripple effect that his greater freedom has on the rest of the team. Because before I move on to Odegaard in those famous left channels that I've been speaking about a long time on the channel, his deeper role in this build-up from right centre mid has an integral knock-on effect to the rest of the team further afield. And I'll be quick on this because it's already known and I've already analysed it in detail, but it's important context. Because by moving deeper to increase his own zone of influence, he in turn moves out of Bukayo Saka's zone, and whilst there still needs to be an injection of creativity on the left-hand side, increasing Saka's own zone of influence is equally important. And Odegaard often sets up a sort of trio of movements whereby White can suddenly move and hold the width as a fifth or sixth man on the right-hand side, giving us that additional dynamism. Third man runs from deep, and an overlapper which allows Saka to move into the half space and inside channels where he's so devastating, and Arsenal try and create conditions where he's not just surrounded by multiple players out wide all the time. And sort of the knock-on effect, I guess, with this evolving build-up I've just been describing, Tomiyasu can either move back into creating a back three with these sort of White outside movements and balance the system, making sort of a 3-3-4, or he can promote with White, and this creates sort of a 2-3-5 shape. And it is in this midfield 2 or 3, Odegaard now has license to roam with the platforming and with Partey and Rice behind him, and also Tomiyasu. I've frequently mentioned, you're probably getting bored of it now, in fact you definitely will be, but for new watchers, I frequently mention how Odegaard becomes brilliantly vertical and more efficient with his touches the further left he gets. And this is essentially all to do with body angles, and it correlates with my discussion on Odegaard wanting to give him the zone of influence he needs and absolutely deserves. Yet this build-up system, I think, shows that there isn't a specific move switch from Odegaard from right to left centre mid that's needed, because if this level of fluidity continues with the platform and Rice and Partey, Odegaard can sometimes just even vacate some of his deeper responsibilities and cheat across the lanes, and he can ghost into pockets where at times you can stop and think, how is he this free? But when you're an opposition side who are facing this team who can drop either of their eights, can invert either fullback, who have constant rotations in the final third as well, with Havertz and Trossard, just two more pieces that are constantly drifting and dragging, creating and exploiting space, Arsenal, from this point of view, may just be the hardest team to defend on the planet. And in these moments when Odegaard finds himself more central or close to the left, it occurs in two situations. Number one, it's a way to create transitions by finding him in space, and this is where sort of we are building from much deeper and our pendulum 8 movements have destabilised the opposition pressing structure. Or this can come in more settled play, again, Rice and Partey giving us that platform, and Tomiyasu can either drop into that wide left centre-back or promote, and in these moments where sort of the opposition's defensive structure seems more set, Odegaard to Havertz making that run from right to left across the backline is really deadly. But to finish, where might this pendulum 8 system evolve into next? This strays into where my Urian Timber video will go, so I'm not going to cast my thoughts too much. But in pre-season and the start of this season, I highlighted the new shapes Arteta was using to make us unpredictable in possession. And we are seeing more of them now in this pendulum 8 system. But there is a system in the long run that we may just see absolutely perfect for this growing freedom of expression we're seeing with these Arsenal players. And it's the 3-diamond-3 or the 3-1-6 shape we deployed against Nottingham Forest on the opening day, with a left and a right centre mid able to pivot with each other up and down to support Rice in the 6, with the tip of the diamond then best occupied by Vieira, Emil Smith-Rowe or Havertz as sort of an out-and-out Ramdeuter type. And again, this bulletproofing in transitional defence allows this sort of additional body at the tip of the diamond or in midfield. But I will get onto this more in the Timber video, and where his role as a free sort of left back is particularly intriguing. But I think this just epitomises this 3-diamond-3 setup. It epitomises and probably gives more structure to a system with 2 auxiliary options in the 8s to control with the fixed 6 that I think is potentially really exciting for Arsenal going forward. But that's all I have time for this video. I really hope you've enjoyed and are enjoying this greater fluidity in the Arsenal build-up that we're seeing continually increase and evolve since the team have come back from Dubai. I've certainly really loved it, and I just thought it was really important to touch on it because I haven't really seen it discussed or analysed at length by anyone on social media. So that is my video for today, but coming up we got a big deep dive on Jurrien Timber and why we should be so excited for his return. But that is all from me from now. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.